One insult erased an entire empire from the map. Think about what it takes to erase a kingdom from history. Not to weaken it, not to beat it in a war and force a treaty, but to wipe it so completely that its greatest cities never fully recover, even 800 years later. That kind of destruction almost never begins with an army. It begins with a decision. A single moment when a powerful man, certain of his own strength, chooses to make an example of someone he should have left alone. The ruler at the center of this story commanded the wealthiest empire in the Islamic world, and he threw all of it away in under 3 years over a matter of wounded pride. And it did not start on a battlefield. It started with a caravan. In 1218, Genghis Khan was not looking for war. He was looking for trade. He sent a caravan of 500 merchants west into the Khwarezmian Empire, the richest kingdom in the Muslim world, ruled by Shah Muhammad II. The Shah's own governor called the merchants spies, executed every one of them, and seized their goods. The man who gave that order was no minor king. Shah Muhammad ruled a realm that stretched across what is now Iran, Uzbekistan, and Afghanistan, studded with jewel cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, and by most measures, he was the single most powerful monarch between the Mediterranean and India. Here is the part that makes what followed so tragic. Genghis had reached out to him in friendship first. Not long before, he had sent the Shah a warm message proposing peace, calling himself the Lord of the Rising Sun and the Shah the Lord of the Setting Sun, and asking for nothing more than open and safe trade between their lands. To seal that promise, he sent the caravan, hundreds of merchants carrying a fortune in silk, silver, and jade. But when it reached the border town of Otrar, the governor there, a kinsman of the Shah named Inalchuk, looked at all that wealth and saw an opportunity. He branded the traders as spies, had them killed, and kept everything. The Persian historian Atta Malik Javaini, writing a generation later, recorded that a single cameleer escaped the massacre and carried the news back east. So what would you do if you were the most feared man on the steppe and someone had just robbed and murdered the people you sent in peace? Genghis Khan stayed calm. He sent 3 ambassadors to the Shah and asked for one thing: hand over the single governor who did this. It was a reasonable request. The Shah's answer was to behead the lead ambassador. Then he had the beards burned off the other 2 and sent them home with their faces bare. Understand how small a price the Shah was being asked to pay. Inalchuk was one expendable official, and handing him over would have cost the empire nothing. But the Shah refused because bending to a nomad chief felt beneath him. His court flatterers called him the Second Alexander, the Sultan of Islam. Why should a man like that answer to a herdsman from the grasslands? So instead of surrendering one guilty governor, he chose to answer an emperor with humiliation. It was, in every sense, the most expensive decision any ruler has ever made. In that world, a man's beard was his honor, and burning it was the deepest insult you could give. The Shah believed he was showing strength. But do you know who he had just humiliated? Here is what the Shah did not understand. The man he had just insulted was not some minor chieftain on the plains. By 1219, Genghis Khan had already spent a lifetime doing the impossible, forging the feuding Mongol tribes, who had butchered each other for centuries, into a single disciplined nation under one law. The historian Jack Weatherford, in his book Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World, describes an army built entirely on merit and loyalty, organized in tidy units of 10, that could move faster than any force on earth. His riders governed by a written code of law and used a relay of fresh horses to cover 100 miles in a single day, appearing where no one thought an army could reach. Genghis had already stormed the walled cities of northern China and shattered the armies of the Jin dynasty. He did not fight for insults, and he did not fight for glory. He fought to win, completely, and he had never once been beaten in the field. The Shah had picked a quarrel with the most effective military mind in human history, and Genghis did not send a second warning. He came. Genghis Khan came with 200,000 riders. Otrar, Bukhara, Samarkand, Urgench. He led that host west across thousands of miles of desert and mountain, then split it into columns that struck from directions the Shah thought were impossible. Rather than gather his own huge army into one fist, the Shah made a fatal choice. He scattered his soldiers among his walled cities and told them to hold. Against a normal enemy, those walls would have held for years. Against this one, they became traps. Otrar, where it all began, held out for months before it fell, and Inalchuk, the governor whose greed had started the war, was captured and, by one grim legend, executed by having molten silver poured into his eyes and ears. At Bukhara, Genghis rode into the great mosque and, as Juvaini recorded, told the terrified crowd that he was the punishment of God, sent because of their sins. Samarkand, the Shah's own showpiece capital, defended by a garrison larger than the attacking force, surrendered in days. At Urgench, the Mongols are said to have broken the river dams and drowned whatever the fire had spared. And at Nishapur, where one of Genghis's own sons-in-law was killed by an arrow from the walls, the reprisal was so total that the chroniclers claim the Mongols stacked the skulls of the dead into pyramids and put even the cats and dogs to the sword. This was not looting. It was erasure, carried out on purpose. One by one, the greatest cities of the age were burned to the ground, and historians believe the Mongols killed more than 1 million people. How many really died? Numbers from the 13th century are always slippery, and historians argue over them to this day, some holding to the medieval chroniclers' millions, others to a few 100,000. But the Arab historian Ibn al-Athir, who lived through the news of it, called the invasion the greatest catastrophe ever to befall mankind, a horror he could barely force himself to write down. Whatever the true figure, an entire civilization of scholars, libraries, canals, and cities was torn out of the world in a handful of years. And every bit of it had been avoidable. The Shah never fell in battle. He fled to a tiny island in the Caspian Sea and died there, alone, in rags, less than 3 years after he burned 3 beards. His end is almost hard to believe. As his cities burned, the ruler of the richest empire in Islam did not rally his troops or die sword in hand defending his throne. He ran. 2 of Genghis Khan's finest generals, Jebe and Subutai, were sent to hunt him down, and they chased him across the whole of Persia, town to town, never once letting him rest. His own mother, Turkin Khatun, who had ruled at his side and controlled much of the army, was seized and dragged into captivity. Sick, exhausted, and abandoned by almost everyone, the Shah finally rode out to a barren island in the Caspian Sea. He died there of illness within weeks, so destitute that there was reportedly no shroud to bury him in. The same man who a few years earlier had been called the Sultan of Islam. His son, Jalal al-Din, fought on bravely for a while longer, but the empire itself was finished, and it never came back. Robert Greene calls it Law 19. Know who you are dealing with, and do not offend the wrong person. The Shah commanded one of the largest armies on earth, and it did not save him, because he insulted the one man he should have feared, and one insult erased an entire empire from the map. If this story was worth your time, tap the subscribe button just below this video. It's free, and it tells YouTube to keep bringing you the history you were never taught. New stories land on Discovery Daily every single week. Before you go, were you taught this in school? Leave your answer in the comments.